an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Travelers, Season 2, Episode 4, 1127. In this episode, there is an agricultural conglomerate that is producing a seed that threatens to drain the soil of all nutrients, spread like a weed, and probably incite a famine within the next decade or two. And our team is trying to stop it. And all I can think is how unsexy an agricultural crisis is. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Michael for commissioning this episode. So when I say what I said, which is that this is unsexy, that is by no means a criticism of the episode at all. In fact, it's sort of the point. Because the problem they're having, the team that is, when I say they, is that they are trying so hard to get people to care about this very real issue. And it's hard to do that with something like this. What's so incredibly irritating is how obsessed we as a culture are with post-apocalyptic stories. And yet the actual lead up to the apocalypse is the sort of thing that we participate in regularly, almost every time. And yet that part is of no interest to us. It's like we're playing with fire and we're hoping a little bit to get burned because we've heard that being burned is really cool. There's just this sort of vibe that people want there to be a post-apocalyptic world because they think it seems like everything that they are currently weighed down with in terms of what their priorities are and their responsibilities will sort of be lifted from them, and it will turn the world into a free-for-all, which they seem to think is preferable to their current situation or our current situation on Earth. And my issue here is that I understand why you'd feel that way. That's what's so frustrating, is that I kind of get it, that the idea of a total paradigm shift and the world like completely tilting on its axis sounds like maybe that could be a blessing in disguise in its way. But nobody ever wants to see themselves as one of the victims of the thing. They always want to see themselves as one of the survivors of the thing. And all the other people are the ones who mysteriously fall to this illness or are in an area where there is no farming or whatever. And it's this sort of thing is happening right now. Like this sort of the patent on seeds, for example, that you are unable to grow from the product that you create. So you have to continually buy the seeds from the manufacturer rather than being able to like have a sustainable cycle of regrowing that the farmer controls, is a very well known tactic for creating profit in this industry. And this kind of engineering is well known. The idea that there would be something that tries to draw as many nutrients as possible out of the soil, thus rendering the soil itself essentially sterile for the next use. I mean, I will be very surprised if there isn't something like this on the market right now. I will be pretty shocked. This seems like the exact kind of short-term thinking that we love love, love, love so much in capitalism. And honestly, I used to think as a kid that this sort of like storyline was really an exaggeration. And I realize now that how untrue that is. This is literal truth. People don't care about what happens to anybody alive in the world after them. After them is even giving them too much room. They don't care about anybody else in the world. End of sentence, right? These people like that, the priority is the profit, and that is all that factors into it. And it's so depressing because these people have all of the weight of a system behind them. They have so much money backing them. And because of that, so much power. And frequently, this idea of like environmental terrorism is put out there as like one of those when you go too far that you become the bad guy yourself kind of things. And I was delighted to see in this episode that blowing up the lab is being thumbs up by the director. This isn't being played as like, oh, well, we have to prevent them from doing this because that's not going to achieve that. Look, maybe it won't achieve the thing. And I really understand Philip's argument later on. But I also feel like sometimes you've just got to do something to feel that you're doing something. And that's not a hugely sustainable place to be. And it may not actually be true. It may feel true that you're doing something or not. But unfortunately, that's sort of how human nature is. We need to feel some modicum of control over things to be motivated. And so having like small wins like this, I feel like plays into that need, you know? So I found this episode really like distressing because it feels so real life and so very, what's the word I want? It's extremely near. This doesn't feel like some distant future thing. Like, for example, that weird antimatter, I guess, from season 1, which I don't personally like. I really liked that plot line, don't get me wrong, and the way that it was handled. But it is the substance that is science fiction to me and does not feel close and real. This feels close and real because it's also incredibly boring. Getting people fired up about seeds. It's a tough thing to do. And this is part of why I got out of doing, I'm sorry guys, I will talk about the episode itself, but I am talking about the episode. I'm just trying to give you guys an idea. When you work in this kind of sector, and by this kind of sector, I mean, when you're working in politics and you're trying to affect changes of this nature, where he's trying to stop a bill that would allow these agricultural companies to be able to test the seeds without actually having to undergo any FDA approval or anything like that. Getting people's attention is so difficult. And like, guys, getting people's attention on a sexy issue is bad enough. It's shocking how short people's attention spans are. And honestly, it's not even their fault. That's what's, for me, the most like frustrating part is that I completely understand why people begin to tune things out. There is so much bad shit that feels so out of our control that to a point you just have to be able to shut that part of your brain down now and then in order to live your life. You can't function constantly hyper aware of everything. There's just no way. So I'm not even that mad at people who can't have their attention held by issues like this because I get it. And this is part of why when I started the broadcast, and those of you who are new to Unspoiled may not have heard of it, but the broadcast was a show that I started at this point, probably like 4 years ago, that was meant to focus on specifically like women's rights issues, but it began to sort of encompass a lot of various political issues, mostly sort of human rights and civil rights. But I was hosting a weekly episode where I would be on camera and call into my representatives, whether it be my senator or congressman, or even sometimes I would call into like local level, like district. I was trying to make it sort of to take the mystique out of getting in touch with your representatives and show people exactly one issue per week that we were focusing on, to sort of filter out all of the noise of the various issues and make it feel like something that was what's the word? Manageable, I guess. It was a manageable goal. We would pick one bill that was on and often a topic that was sort of in the news at the time. We would do a 20 or 30 minute sort of info dump, if you will, about the bill and what it really meant, because sometimes it will be written in this like incredibly oblique language that it feels is purposely misleading. And then we would back that up with data and explain our stance, and then we would make the calls to our representatives. It's the kind of effort that I really was proud of at the time, because it felt like it was breaking things down in a manageable way. Guys, when I tell you that almost nobody participated in this with me, I mean almost nobody. It was me and my co-host, and occasionally our guest, and maybe one person who eventually became like a co-host because they were so consistently always there. Other than that, nobody did this with us, which was the point. It was always on Crowdcast. We were live every time, trying to involve people. It's awfully difficult. And that's part of the point of capitalism, is to keep you scrambling so constantly and just trying to stay alive that you can't make time for asking for actual change. You can't make time for researching these kinds of topics. So honestly, as much as I hate to admit that a big... I don't want to be on Philip's side this episode, because I feel like he's just going down a really bad path, and to a degree, he has a sort of fatalistic attitude that I find really frustrating. He has a real point. The concept that making this one guy a martyr is going to do anything. Do you guys know how many leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the people who were in the community, like standing for the Black community in Flint, Michigan, regarding their water issue, do you know how many of those people have wound up dead? Because if you haven't looked into that, it's frankly appalling. And that shit gets almost no traction in the news at all. Now, granted, this dude is a representative in Congress, or is he a senator? I don't even remember. I think he's a senator, right? So this is definitely going to get way more press than an activist would. Absolutely. But I do think that this crew and the director are underestimating what it takes to get everybody mobilized. And the recent protests that we've been seeing regarding the Black Lives Matter movement have only been made possible in large part by the pandemic and people not being at work regularly anymore. So people have a lot of time on their hands, and they are able to read a lot more and educate themselves more about things that they hadn't had time for, and B, show up because they aren't at work. It's been kind of a perfect storm in that regard. So the team is sort of like, they're doing something that's very admirable and that I really am behind in spirit, and I think is all based in sound ideas and concept. But after seeing how much we are willing to take and how sexy something has to be made for people to get alerted to it and get their focus sustained on it, I don't really have a huge amount of hope that that's going to happen here. I'm very curious about whether the show is going to make a point of continuing to follow the development of any movement that they attempted to create here. Like, are we going to get periodic like looks at the news, and are we going to get to see protesters out on the streets, and the fact that they are like educating themselves and other people about what's going on with these seeds? Like, I part of me wants it to work because this is a TV show, and I would like to at least be able to sustain the fantasy in a television show that this would have a great effect. So it's part of the same thing as watching something like Law and Order, where it's a fantasy where women get to see people like rapists actually brought to justice versus what actually happens. And I feel like I'd kind of like to see that, but also, so Michael said in the chat, no one cares about the day before, the day after tomorrow. That's a good way to put that. That's something that I've always said too, is that like regarding something like The Walking Dead, I got really excited when Fear the Walking Dead came out because it looked like it was going to be dealing a lot more in the crisis itself before the world just completely goes down to this virus. And it started off looking that way. And then about like halfway through season 1, it became clear that it was just going to be another zombie show. And I was like, oh, because I really kind of expected it to be more political and more involved with like the, it's sort of, I was hoping for something a little bit more like World War Z, where you get a look at the attempts to contain it and the reasons why that didn't work, and the misjudgments or the assumptions made about human nature that turned out to be right or wrong. And so I'm into logistics. You guys all know that. It's not really that surprising that that part of the story is what really fascinates me. But it bums me out because I'm fascinated with that sort of thing, because even if it's fiction, I see it as sort of an opportunity to learn what didn't work and maybe implement something that does work, because I've seen how this could potentially play out, fiction or not. And it bums me out how just people seem only to care about the aftermath when we get to just shoot whoever we want and there's no law to get in our way. Yeah, I mean, I guess. So, all right, let's start off the episode. Now, I'm going to, there were a couple of things that confused me a little bit here. There is a meeting between Carly and this kid, and she tells him that she's Sandstorm. So I guess they're the ones who like got this thing made, and then they pretend that it's Trevor who made it. Is that correct? Am I making this assumption right? Because initially I was just confused because it's sort of intercut her situation with Trevor's. So it felt initially to me like we were watching them each have a meeting with somebody under the same name at the same time. And it wasn't until we got much further into it that I thought back and was like, oh, I guess he was posing as this kid. So it turns out that there is this girl who, her real name is Abby. She goes by Sandstorm. And she is very aware of the potential danger of these seeds. She is somebody who has been active as, I think she says she was like an intern, and she tried to hold up the research on this. She says at one point when she's talking to Trevor way later that she like even tried to blackmail somebody who was involved, and it didn't really work. So she begins to feel that the only possible method of stopping this is to bomb the research lab. Now, we don't really get that much detail beforehand about what the overall, what the casualties are like of this bombing, because they're looking at this bombing as it's happened already, and they are trying to help it to happen at the time that it originally happened, which is where the title of the episode comes for, 11/27, because that is the time at which it happened. And she at the last second sort of backs out of it. And I guess that I had thought, and this is because I don't know about this stuff, guys. Spoiler alert. I have no idea. I have no concept of how big this sort of facility is. But when they say bomb the lab, my stupid, ignorant ass is out here thinking basically one room and all the computers in that room. Because I guess I had the idea in my head that it was like the kind of lab that you have in a college or even a high school. It didn't occur to me until we see the place that this whole building is a research lab and everybody in it. So when she says, I can't do it, I don't know what I was thinking, I was kind of like, really? And then I began to realize, especially at the end of the episode when it looks like somebody has done it for them, that explosion is sizable. That shit was really big. So then I understood, she just didn't want to kill a ton of people. She thought that she was going to get out okay. We know that isn't what happened. But even so, this was going to be hundreds of people dead, at least. And again, I am super, super hopeful that in the next episode, we are going to get to see some of the fallout regarding this, because I'm extremely curious. After everything went left and happened in a totally different way than what they had expected, I am super, super curious what kind of ripple effects this is going to have, because that's the point of this show, is that they keep changing things in the hope that it will shift something else and manage to sidestep some sort of catastrophe in the future. And, that could potentially have been the fact that it didn't go off when it was supposed to, but did go off later in the day. This could be a good thing. It could be a very bad thing. I don't know anything about, maybe if it went off later the same day, but they had the chance to get off some of the research to a different facility right before the bomb went off, maybe it renders the fact that they bombed everything pointless and null and void. Or maybe there was somebody really important who was on the premises that wasn't in the original time, and that changes the course of things as well. But so this whole this conversation between Trevor and Abby initially, he is really sort of pushing her a little bit more than both Marcy and Philip feel is appropriate in the moment. They're watching Trevor and hearing what he's saying to this girl, and they both seem to feel that he's being a little bit too alarmist about cautioning her regarding how this thing, how unstable it is and potentially dangerous it is. And eventually they set it up that he's in this computer lab that she goes to after school every day or after work. She's in it's like a computer cafe. And she does the are you following me thing, even though he was there first. And eventually he has a bunch of stuff open on his computer very purposely, because he's investigating this whole thing in order to try and draw her in and get her to confide in him about what it is that she's doing, because it seems like he is a fellow comrade. He is somebody who is also concerned about the same issues, and thus gains her trust and gets himself and Philip a foot in the door to become involved in what it is that she's doing. So the seeds are meant to pull extra nutrients out of the soil in order to create a bigger, better harvest, 20 to 30% bigger, which is huge. But the problem is that it will leave the soil, or potentially leave the soil. The problem is they don't know, because they have not been forced to do any sort of testing, because they're getting this bill passed. And it's all sort of being looked at by our team as this bill is getting passed. So we need to stop this because we know that this whole thing is going to happen. And being sort of taken for granted that that's a foregone conclusion. And so maybe it won't be terrible if we're talking in hypotheticals, but these dudes are from the future and they seem very concerned. So I'm going to go ahead and say that they are indeed very terrible, that this is going to go very badly. And Philip later investigates this thing and tells her about how, and it's not even that he investigates, like this is shit they know already, but he has to pretend that he just found this out. That part of the, I guess, blueprint that they use for building these seeds and the genetics behind them are based on seeds that are extremely like invasive. And so this, once planted, you won't be able to take it back. You won't be able to be like, oh, we planted it in these fields and it really did drain the soil and we realized that this isn't going to work out as well as we thought. So we're just going to take these out of circulation and we're not going to use them anymore. It's not going to be like that. This shit is going to take root and then it is going to be sort of airborne and out of control and begin to just appear everywhere. And I don't know if you guys have any invasive species where you live, but it's a really weird feeling to find out that something that you take for granted as part of the scenery is an invasive species. Like there were some plants when I was growing up in Connecticut that I thought were really beautiful that I found out later were not native and somehow had gotten up here and like absolutely were everywhere. And you can watch it happen sometimes. In the spring here, last year, there were patches of it, but this year, there were carpets of these very small purple blue flowers everywhere. And it was like over the course of 1 year, all of a sudden, practically everybody's front lawns. This shit happens really quickly. It's the sort of thing that when you talk about an invasive species, people picture it being over the course of like a decade or something. Not necessarily. So yeah, these guys are very agitated about that. And when they explain to her that it's even worse than she thought, and she thought it was pretty fucking apocalyptically bad, she is even more motivated to do this. The problem is that she begins to be softened a little bit in the way that she's looking at this by talking to Trevor. And he sort of describes the overall, her desire to do this, he says, is because she believes in humanity. And she's trying to say she doesn't really believe in anything. Because when she hears the words believe in something, she assumes that this means God or some sort of force, you know. But he's like, no, you do. You wouldn't be worried about this if you didn't believe in anything. So you do. It's just different. And that seems to be once it's down to the wire and she has to do the thing and plant the bomb. It seems like his words sort of got to her a little bit, and she's realizing that if she does believe in humanity, then maybe killing a bunch of people really isn't the way to go. And I hate this because I understand her feeling, of course. I'm not like rooting for everybody in this lab to be killed. There are going to be a ton of people who maybe don't realize the danger of what they're working on. There are going to be people who are just there because they're receptionists and they have nothing to do with the actual science behind what's happening here. They're not the lobbyists who are out here ruining the country. They are just people trying to make a living and in the wrong place. So I really do understand her feeling, but also what is there to be done? Philip later says that there is another company that already has a really similar seed ready to launch like in a year, like not too long after this. And so he thinks the efforts at blowing this up would be pointless. And he says we could just remotely wipe all of their data and delete any research and anything about how they created this thing so that they would have to start from scratch. Which, I mean, that to me does seem like a much better option. And I'm really curious why that isn't the way that the director decided to have them handle things. If hacking into the computer system is so easy, that seems like a really neat way to take care of not only this company, but the other one that allegedly has something that's like about to be on the market as well. Delete both of their shit, completely fuck it up, and don't leave a trail. And what are they going to do? Are they going to suspect terrorists, in quotes? Yes. But I have no doubt you guys can, cover your tracks. That's like kind of the point of what you do. And then at the end of the episode, Philip is given what I believe is like the formula for creating these seeds. And I think, and I'm not totally positive about that because I'm not a fucking scientist and I don't know what language this is, so my assumption is because of the timing of the explosion and then this kid turning up and giving him this message, I assume this has a direct link to the information about these seeds. So what, I have two questions here. One, which is Philip going to be able to remember this information? Because this motherfucker's high, or at least coming down off of a high. Will he be able to retain this? I don't know how much this affects his work. Second question. Why do we need the information about these seeds? What exactly is the director doing here? Something weird is going on with the way that everything is being handled. So I'm going to back up a little bit and we're going to talk about Congressman Bishop. Okay, he's not a senator. Congressman Bishop, who is the gentleman that Mac was told to save on that plane, and then his wife got all mixed up in the whole thing. And I am... So here's the thing. I understand this dude being angry about basically being told that he has to die for the cause in this way after everything that he went through to get here and whatnot. It turns out that the host body has a heart problem that the director did not foresee. And so he is destined to die anyway. And the point is going to be, we will make his death count by having it be a very public assassination while giving a speech about this issue in order to martyr him and generate an outpouring of support and interest in this case. Fine. Good idea. But I'm starting to wonder if the director is really the director that they all think it is anymore. Because shit has really begun to change clearly in that future. And between this and the fact that this is yet another person who's had like a medical issue that they didn't know about after being put in that body, part of me wonders if that's not actually purposeful. If maybe the director did know and expected that people weren't going to want to volunteer to be killed, and so simply kept that information to itself or themselves or whomever, and essentially tricked somebody into volunteering for a death sentence because they need them to accomplish certain things before they go, and they need them to be on the, quote, right side of things before they're shot, and otherwise, who's going to agree to do it? I think that maybe that's not the case, because I get the impression from the future, at least from what we've heard, that shit is bad enough there that people might volunteer to come backward just to have a good time for a minute before they are killed. Like, there's sort of this bleakness that makes me feel like everybody knows they're going to die anyway. So maybe as long as I get to choose how, maybe they would be able to get a volunteer. I don't know. But I just sort of have this like low-level paranoia regarding this whole thing now. And Congressman Bishop is here to tell McLaren, oh, hey, so here's the thing. You have to kill me. And is extremely salty about it, kids. Oh my God, this guy is so mad. He is so mad. And him and Philip, if they got together, it would be a bad scene. Because both of them just do not feel like they have faith in the system they're working with anymore. Both of them seem to feel they got duped into a thing that turns out to be very different from what they had expected or what they were told. And it seems like this dude is sort of, he has decided to go ahead and go through with his orders only because, and this is like conjecture on my part, but he lives a very public life. And I imagine if he tried to duck out of this, it's not going to work. Like, it's, the dude's body is going to betray him in any case. You know, this guy has to submit to this version of his own death because he's going to die either way, and he knows that. But it does not feel that if he had other options, he would be inclined to take this fall. He's very, very bitter about it. So it turns out that it's going to be Carly who has to take the shot on him. And I didn't really get it until in the midst of the thing, but the explosion is meant to be the major distraction so that he can be shot and then Carly can get away because the cops are all going to be pouring downtown towards that lab explosion and too distracted to immediately respond to a shooting here and figure out where she came from. And this is why everybody is waiting with such bated breath for the explosion. So when Abby decides that she doesn't want to go through with it and she comes back and pounds on the side of the van and tells them, it's a terrible moment because what happens is she's killed by the order of the director coming through her body, which we know an adult brain can't handle. So she loses her life anyway, even though she chooses not to fulfill her role in the whole prediction of what was going to happen. And then it's left to Trevor to complete the mission. And Trevor, because he's a good soldier, he's not happy about it, but he does that shit. He brings that inside and is fully prepared to die there. And honestly, I had a lot of respect for him over this. I knew that he would. He is just the kind of person that values duty and the mission and trying to make things safe for Carly as well. That, of course, he went through with it. But there was a moment where I wondered if he might not waver. I even wondered if maybe he would try to convince Abby to not do it. And I don't mind the fact that he doesn't try to convince her not to. He's accepting as much as you can be that when you're doing this sort of thing, there are going to be casualties. And you just sort of have to accept that and go into things knowing that, and you don't have to like it, but you do need to just sort of be willing to sit with that and have faith that it's going to be worth it in the end. And that faith is the thing that Philip is missing. For understandable reasons. I mean, I'm not entirely faithful either. Like I have said before, the director is a program built by people. There are so many sort of instances in our history where we have built things thinking that this is no longer dependent on like human assessment because it's an algorithm or something, and we find out that biases still manage to come out. I mean, even simple stuff like facial recognition software that does not recognize black faces because the lighting doesn't work the same way. That is a really good example of like, are these people out here being like, oh, we're going to make this so that black people can't use this technology? Not necessarily, no. But they are using only white people for test subjects, obviously, to see if it works, or this would have been a problem spotted much earlier into things. And that kind of implicit bias just gets folded into the mixture when you're building stuff like this. So once I realized that the director was simply a program and not even a person, which would be bad enough, it both made it clear why people trust it and how easily corrupted that is. And that was going off of what we knew the director to be when they left the future. And now it's turned into a whole other thing because of this, sort of faction that has split off. But as much as I do not agree, and I have the same sort of mindset overall that Philip has, I definitely admired Trevor deciding to go through with this and not let his own people down. I have such mixed feelings about the whole thing because part of me is really mad at Philip in the end when he leaves Carly out to dry, and he says, but you're fine now. And she says, that's not the point. And I agreed with her in that moment. I was like, it isn't the point, dude. She was depending on you and you're supposed to be her teammate, and you just were not there for her in the whole function that you were supposed to perform. So in that moment, I was squarely on her side. And then he reminded me that she got an order to kill McLaren. Guys, I completely forgot about that. How long ago was that at this point? I mean, that was season 1, right? I feel like that was a while ago. And he essentially tells everybody, because they're mad at him for not following orders, for, going against directives and protocols and whatnot. And he's basically like, oh, okay, so I guess I'm the only one who doesn't do everything I'm told. I'm definitely the only one who didn't follow protocol every day that we've been here, right? And points out she got this order to kill McLaren, which she did not carry out. We know that McLaren knocked up his wife, which is absolutely not supposed to happen. And what was the other thing? Because there have been a couple different instances of them messing with shit. Essentially, he is pointing out that they all feel in their case it was justified for them to not follow orders. But then he doesn't do it in a case they disagree with, and all of a sudden they can't trust him, and he isn't, and he's just kind of calling bullshit on that. And frankly, the man has a fucking point. He just does, and this is one of those things that, those of you who read the satire site Reductress, one of my favorites ever that has been on the map. Just a couple days ago, they had a headline that said, cheating is never okay, comma, unless it was me, comma, in which case we're all human. And I can't think of a better analogy here. That's essentially exactly what they're all doing, is trying to be like, well, I mean, shit happens and we're just doing our best, okay? But then when it's Philip, everybody, because it's much more blatant and the sort of effect of it feels like it impacts everybody very immediately, they are willing to sort of point the finger at him. It's also, people don't want Carly to shoot McLaren, right? Like, they're ignoring the fact that she was given this order because they don't want her to carry it out either. So what it comes down to is that Philip made a decision on behalf of everybody unilaterally. And really, that seems to be more what they have the problem with than him not following orders. It's the fact that he didn't consult with them and made a split-second decision because he just wanted to save Trevor's life and find a different way to do this, and he does not consider Trevor's death to have been, on the whole, he does not believe the payoff would have been worth the loss. And in all the other cases, either people don't know about what has happened, like McLaren knocked his wife up, but the only person who knows so far is Marcy, or they agree. People don't want McLaren to be murdered. And I just think that it's an interesting question. I really like this sort of thing in stories. I like it in television and books when there is an argument going on between two sides and you keep changing your mind about whose side you're on. For me, that is excellent writing. That doesn't have to be the case. There are times where somebody is just dead wrong and you know they're dead wrong. And that has its place. But I really enjoy being challenged in that way, where I think I know going into a scene whose side I'm going to be on. And then I'm like, oh, wow, actually, that's a really good point. I totally forgot about that. So I really liked this final sort of like face off with everybody. That said, what's going on with Philip is so concerning. And I mentioned last episode how we hadn't seen this new girl. And I wondered if her sole role in his life was going to be the bad person who introduced him to this drug. And the longer this goes on, the more it feels like that's exactly what she is. She's just here to pour drops in his eyes and pass out with him on this bed. It's really weird because, like, I don't feel the chemistry between the two of them. It just feels like they're bound together by this drug. Maybe that's the point, that I'm just supposed to feel this way. It's just a shame, you know, that she's sort of one-dimensional. And I feel that this dependence on this is supposed to be, like, allegedly without too many side effects. But it seems really clear that when he doesn't get it, he flies off the handle. Like, it seems like there is some sort of side effect to it, whether or not they want to acknowledge that, or whether or not they tell him the truth about it, because he says that Marcy looked at the drops and gave him the okay, but I'm not positive he was telling the truth. I hope he was. I hope that he's not just taking a thing that some stranger who says, trust me, gave him without getting it looked at first. But even if she did say it was okay, there's potentially something going on here that maybe she doesn't know to look for. So, and obviously part of the reason why he's using is because he is beginning to crack regarding the mission that they're on and the overall objective and the trustworthiness of this program, that they are not only, they are putting their lives in the hands of this program, but they are also putting millions of other people's lives, billions, really, if you want to just say like the fate of the world, which is not an unfair statement. And if you begin to think maybe you were wrong, yeah, that's going to fuck you up. Like, I get why you would begin to start to want to escape that pressure when you are off the clock. However, I am concerned that this is going to affect his overall capacity to function in his role. Because with the end of the episode and this girl coming in and telling him this formula, it's, you know, she has to have him like open up and retain this certain like memory bank in his mind, which is a really wild thing that I want more information about. And I don't know, was he able to do that? We see him standing or sitting at the edge of the bed as she's talking, really like trying to focus. And I get the impression that he's managing it, but I can't be sure. And that's sort of where we leave things with him. So let's talk about McLaren and his wife real quick. There's not a whole lot to tell here. Really, what's going on is we know that his wife has, previously had a really terrible miscarriage and had wanted kids very badly, and just it seemed like that wasn't going to happen for her. And now she's pregnant, and she's far enough along that she can feel the baby moving around. But when she goes to a checkup, there is a potential problem based on a shadow on the ultrasound that could potentially be a blood clot, which might be a problem with the placenta and maybe something like detaching and that is an enormous problem. That is a very serious thing. But it's also something that could be potentially preventable. And McLaren goes to Marcy and tells her about this, which he's been keeping it secret from everybody, that his wife is pregnant. And he tells her, and she's very sort of, first of all, she's a little contemptuous of the fact that he broke this rule. Second of all, she assumes that his wife is going to want an abortion. And when he tells her that he's, that's not happening, she wants to carry the baby to term and have the baby, she does not seem to think much of this idea. But he asks her to please just take some time and think it over and consider it. We find out later he really didn't expect her to agree to help. But he gives her some time and he walks away. After he leaves, that doctor man is asking her if she wants to go on a date with him. And we saw her at the very end of the episode. There's a very short scene where she's calling up David and it's going to voicemail and then she's hanging up. And it's clear that she still feels attachment to him, but she also, I think, feels bad about it because she can't give David what he's looking for from her, which is for her to be who she used to be. She can't. It's impossible. So she doesn't want to put him through that, but she also clearly there's something that's drawing her back to him. So when this doctor asks her out, it really feels like she agrees purely because she has nothing else to do. That really seems to be all there is to it. She's just like, yeah, you know what? I need to get over this dude that I'm thinking about. And you're as good a reason as any to go out tonight and do something to get my mind off this whole thing. So they go to dinner. It's a weird scene. There's no chemistry between these two at all. At all. I really hope that we don't have to watch too much more of this because, to be frank, it's incredibly difficult to watch a dude be so obviously into a girl that could not give any fewer shits about him. And she winds up sleeping with him. I think they're in a motel room by the end of the episode. And it doesn't seem like that moved her at all. She had sex with him, I think, in an effort to make herself feel something. And it does not seem to have worked. But one thing that did come from this conversation is he asks her what made her get into healthcare at dinner. And he apologizes after he says it because he says that's a really terrible question. But honestly, I think that's a great question because it's a very revealing question, potentially. The answer could be, people in my family have always followed this line of work and it was something sort of familiar to me. The answer could be, I really, really want to help people and I believe in this. The answer could be, I needed a job that was going to pay for, such and such, and this paid well. So I decided to go to school exclusively to access this level of income. There could be so many very valid reasons why somebody goes into this type of work. So he is very self-deprecating about the question, but I don't really feel like there was anything wrong with it. And she says something about how what they do is going to be even more important in the future, because obviously she's speaking from a position of knowledge. He does not understand that and instead is speaking from the perspective most of us have, which is the hopefulness of somebody who sees advancements beginning to stream in more and more quickly and thus becomes more and more optimistic about what the future in medicine could potentially look like based on the results that we have been seeing. And it was a really sweet moment in its way where Marcy's she's obviously not feeling the way that she wants to feel. Like, she's not having the emotional reaction to things, but the optimism that he has clearly moves her. And when she says, "You seem so optimistic about the future," and he says, "I am, aren't you?" And she says, "Yes." She isn't, but you see this sort of resolve that she's like, you know what? I forgot that was the reason that I started to do this. This is why I initially became a doctor. This was the original motivation. Honestly, guys, that was a really real moment where this will happen when you're talking to kids too. They will remind you of what your ideals used to be that you have utterly lost sight of somewhere along the way. And not necessarily in like a way that's sort of accusatory or anything like that. It will just be a bit of a shock sometimes when somebody points out, you used to want better than this, or you used to think this way and that was why you started to do this. It can be jolting, you know? And after everything that she has gone through and seen, it's hugely understandable that she will have lost sight of that by now. So I love the fact that like everybody has sort of gotten to a point in this team where they are all deviating from the mission for their own reasons. And we have a scene with her and Carly where they're off sitting on the roof of this building and talking about what's going on in their lives a little bit. And Carly is talking about Jeff and the fact that he's stopped drinking and that they both love their son, so they're willing to work in order to care for this kid. And I gotta be honest, the fact that she came home and there was a note from Jeff and he's like at the park, be home in time for dinner, I'm not optimistic about Jeff's agreement to stop drinking. I suspect Jeff is maybe sneaking one or two in while he's at the park, in quotes. He may not be at the park the whole time. That's all I'm saying. That scene with the champagne really, for me, was a giant waving red flag. And if that is true, and he is not doing what he claims, I wonder what Carly's response is going to be. Because obviously, it's true that she cares about her child. Whether or not it's actually her child, intents and purposes, it is. And they only got custody of the kid back because they have agreed to be a united front and work together for this pleasant fiction of being a happy family again. If she makes it clear that things are falling apart already, in any way, they will lose the kid. Very likely. They're still under probation, I believe. So she's going to have to either endure whatever starts to happen or provide some sort of other motivation for Jeff to fucking behave himself. And I don't really know how that will work. The problem for me is I don't really care. Because her storyline fails to intrigue me. I just don't really care about children in a storyline most of the time. Especially because this is a kid that's like a literal infant and so has no real personality that I know of. And so I don't feel any attachment to the child himself. And Jeff is a very like abusive dude who was going to have killed her if he had been allowed to carry things out. So I don't feel like great about a child growing up with this guy. Whether or not he seems to be on his good behavior right now, this man needs extensive therapy to become a better person and a better father. And if he doesn't get that, once the going gets tough, this behavior will out again. That's just how it works with abusive people. They don't just turn over a new leaf all of a sudden and stop acting the way that they did. That came from somewhere. That well is still there. So I don't hold out the same kind of hope that she does. And I don't like Jeff, and I don't care about the baby, and I don't really like Carly as a character. So that whole storyline for me is just, it could just not be there, and I would be fine with that. I'm trying to think if there was anybody else that I sort of missed this episode on what was going on there. I think I've touched on everyone, though. I think that's it. Well, it's perfect timing. I just reached an hour. So yeah, I'm real curious what the fallout's going to be of this explosion and the congressman getting shot. I really wonder how that will work out. And I'm wondering if Carly got picked up on any like cameras or anything. I guess they have control of that and they probably were able to prevent it. But I hope that, her face doesn't wind up getting linked to anything. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Michael, so much for commissioning this. I appreciate you. I hope that you guys are enjoying the coverage, and I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.